Welcome back. Welcome back from lunch break. I hope you have enjoyed the networking during the lunch. We will now continue the conference Open Science from Policy to Practice. And we did ask you some questions at the beginning in Menti, and we can tell you that there are participants in this conference from 49 different countries. And as you may have noticed, from the 42 different speakers we have, they also represent 8 different countries. And the overweight of the representatives come from the academy. So we are very happy with that. So that's good to hear. Stakeholders from the different necessary parties. We will now continue with the EOSC section. The next topic will focus on the European Open Science Cloud. And for this session, EOSC Advancing Open Science to the Next Level. Here with us today to lead this session is Wilhelm Widmark, Library Director at Stockholm University and one of the directors of the EOSC-Association. So welcome, Wilhelm. Kan du hålla det här?
So let's go to something more concrete. Could you say that about EOSC? I hope so, that we will hear some more concrete, not only policies. But we will listen to 5 different stakeholders within the EOSC community that will discuss the current status of open science in Europe and how we are building EOSC together. And as we think that things should be reusable, we will reuse the panel from this morning as well in this panel. So we start with 5 different speakers, and the first speaker is Michael Arentoft from European Commission. Welcome up and take the stage.
Thank you so much, Wilhelm. I'm not sure it's an honor to be reused, but I'll do my best. I've been invited to talk about the European Commission's contribution to developing the European Open Science Cloud, but not only that, because it's a key enabler for practicing open science for our researchers across Europe. To put it in context of our overall open science policy at the EU level, on the left-hand side you see all the practices that we are promoting from a policy point of view, but also from an implementation point of view, and it's all about quality, impact, and efficiency. We are promoting transparency and rigor in the research process, in the research methodologies, which will also be complemented, of course, with the overall objective of immediate open access, promoting open licenses in terms of giving access to and reuse the outputs of research. And of course, the whole purpose of this is to ensure the openness for scrutiny, for validating the research results, and in many cases also for reproducibility. So we're talking about validity, robustness of the results, so quality of the results. As you can see, we're also promoting practices in terms of open collaboration, and that to happen very early in the process. And we have seen many cases where this leads to much easier integration, uptake, and use of the research results. So more impact also. And of course, by sharing, we allow one research team to build on the results of others. On the right-hand side, you see a number of enablers that we are working on, and we have touched on many of these this morning. Of course, the European Open Science Cloud is right at the center of that in terms of providing an open research infrastructure. I would like to start with where we stand today. We had, during most of last year, a study undertaken which showed that only 40% of researchers occasionally store their data in shared data repositories. So more than 60% use their personal physical data storage, or in some cases the local institutional data storage. We also looked at more than 300 data repositories to look at what was the degree of fairness of the data sets there. And again, if you looked at all the attributes of being fair, from PID to metadata to semantic interoperability, you could say that it's somewhere between 15 and 20%. It's very low, and you could even claim maybe less than 10%. We also asked why. Why is it the case you don't share? And they said, well, it costs too much time, it takes too much effort. Very much the arguments that also Nicolas in the previous session outlined. We're not sure that it's legal when we share our data, and we're not rewarded. So there's no incentive for us to share. So what we do from the European Commission point of view is that we support it both politically and program-wise. So politically, we have placed open science and EOSC in particular right at the center of the new European Research Area policy agenda. We have also made sure that it's well positioned in the European strategy for data that contains EOSC as a space for science, research and innovation across Europe, and that will be closely articulated also with many sectoral data spaces, be it in transport, energy or health. Program-wise, we put in place for Horizon Europe a partnership with the stakeholders that pre-allocates almost $500 million from Horizon Europe to go into EOSC developments. And as it is a partnership, we also see corresponding investments from the stakeholder community. We're doing that both in terms of giving grants, but also procurement is part of the picture, and we launched, as I said, a number of studies as well. Our role is also there as a coordinator. We coordinate also strategic developments with the member states in the steering board. We coordinate with the EOSC-Association and the stakeholder community and the partnership board. We also have close interactions with research infrastructures and infrastructures as well. We work with many thematic communities as well, where we see really a demonstration, an early demonstration of what could be the added value of EOSC. And we do also use EOSC as providing the overall monitoring of the uptake of open science practices. Here you see how we have put it straight at the center of the European Research Area policy agenda. It's the first action, and it has there as the center the development of the core of EOSC, but also the federation of infrastructures across Europe, be it research infrastructures, data infrastructures, e-infrastructures. So EOSC is really a federation of these existing infrastructures. But part of the action is also to promote the principles of open science and promote the best practices. So we are also issuing catalogs that hopefully can provide inspiration for using the kind of enablers like EOSC and practice open science. And as I said, also monitoring is part of this. So it's really a community-driven process in the sense that we work all together, Commission, EU member states, associated countries to the program, and most importantly, the research stakeholders themselves. It is a gradual implementation that will come little by little. It will be a living federation that will add both in terms of data, services, and different features that will be provided to our researchers. In government terms, we managed the so-called co-program partnership with the EOSC-Association, and we are in a so-called tripartite governance, not only with the association, but also with the countries that participate in EOSC. Now, I wanted to show this picture, which comes out of our recent procurement of EOSC, to give a bit this picture of EOSC, which is really not an infrastructure by itself, but it's a federation. It pulls together research infrastructures, data infrastructures, e-infrastructures, These are existing ones. It's not something new, a new infrastructure that we are creating. But very importantly, it puts on top of that additional services, additional value-added services, be it tools to make your data fair by design, tools to, so from the outset, or tools to take an existing data set and make it fair, so verification tools. It provides services for integrating your data, for managing your data. It provides service discovery, composability, so you put the services together and you put them in a workflow which pertains to your particular case as a researcher. And also it provides coordinated entry points. So the system will not ask in any way that a researcher shifts from her or his normal entry point, but can use his or her normal thematic research community entry point, or his or her normal institutional entry point or national entry point. Of course, in some cases, could also use the EU node that federates everything in case there's not a thematic or institutional or national entry point. To go a bit more in detail of what is also provided, of course, all these federations means that there should be some harmonization in terms of who can access what in the system, what is acceptable use of the system, what level of service needs to be provided. So these are rules that, of course, need to be harmonized across this federation of systems, be you if you're a user or if you're a service provider. And of course, what binds all this together, what is the glue of all of this, is defined in what we call an interoperability framework. So you need to be able to connect all these digital artifacts. You need to be able to find and to compose all the different services. And this requires, of course, a set of standards, protocols, technologies to bind all of this together. So this is also part of the added value of the EOSC Federation. From the user perspective, very important that the user sees the added value of this, both in terms of being able to integrate increasingly heterogeneous data sets, to be able to manage them properly, in terms of services, that you can find a service not only within your own discipline, but also increasingly across disciplines that researchers need more and more because of the problems that are being tackled. So this discoverability of the service and composing them together into your workflow is an added value that users already see in some disciplinary communities. We have seen quite impressive work, for instance, for marine research, so what they term as the blue cloud. We have seen impressive environments, virtual research environments for Earth observation, for instance. The physics community is also very advanced. So we see, if you like, mini EOSCs already existing, and the purpose, of course, is to make them interact and also to inspire other communities to go to the same levels and beyond. As a provider of the service, also we hope that there's an added value to have a federation and not having to go and provide service to each and every one in the different communities. And of course, us from a policymaker point of view, we see it very much as an enabler, not only for the researchers to practice science, but also to see how these practices are actually taken up. I would like to end with some examples of the projects that we are funding, because I've come to realize that when we go around in different events, we very often talk about policies and principles and system architectures, and in fact, most of the activity, I mean, the majority of the activities is really taking place on the ground. The projects that we fund, the researchers that collaborate on different aspects of this EOSC Federation, being it at the core, being it for the people around the system in terms of developing skills and training, be it for exploiting and developing completely innovative tools for the research community. Be it in a thematic area also, and so far, at least with the part of the funds that we have for the partnership, We have been focusing on different thematics as well. We've been following the EU missions, and I've brought an example of the cancer project that we have here. So here, for instance, you see the FAIR Core for EOSC project that are working on a number of the core elements that really are needed here. Very much around PIDs, so persistent identifiers. How do we assess if this is really compliant across the EOSC system of systems? How are these implemented? They also work on metadata standards and schemes and different registries. So you see all the different elements that are coming together, being developed in the projects that we fund. Here's another example which work also on semantic frameworks that are very important for governance, creating mapping, and so on, but also for assessing the fairness of what is part of this system. And for the interoperability, of course, is extremely important. So another example of a core component that is needed to realize this EOSC of what we call fair data and services. Skills, again, we are supporting as part of the whole process. So as such, it's not part of the system of systems, but we all agree that it's very important that the researchers are trained to the extent that they are able to practice, of course, the kind of approaches that we are promoting. So here they are working on developing a number of competence centers and putting them into a network so that you can have mutual learning from them. You can share the tools, you can share training modules between each other, and so have a more efficient system of bringing our researchers up to the skill levels that are required. I also mentioned that some of our projects are working on the new tools that we see emerging for researchers, and of course many of these are around AI. So this project, AI for EOSC, is exactly about extending this offering of services for our researchers with, in this case, a focus on AI, machine learning and deep learning. And I'm sure we all agree that this is going in many cases to revolutionize also the approach to research. And the final one I brought, as I said, was in a thematic area where EOSC for Cancer, the EOSC for Cancer project, is trying to reinforce the environment for cancer research, both in terms of how they store, access, share their data, how to make sure that these data sets are fair, so can be interconnected and really reused across, and also are providing new tools, again, linking also to some of the other projects that we are funding, so that at the end of the day, you really have a virtual research environment that allows you everything from data integration, management, and the most efficient use of services. And with that, I would like to thank you, and hopefully it's been inspiring also from the project's point of view. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And after all the speakers, we will have a panel here. And you that are online, you can put questions in the Menti, and they will be asked here. And you that are in the audience, even you can speak, so you can have questions to the panel afterwards. So now it's the next speaker, and it's Karel Luyben he's the president of the EOSC-Association. Welcome, Karel.
Thank you, Wilhelm, and thank you for inviting me to speak on this occasion. You gave the topic, Advancing Open Science to the Next Level, and let's see how EOSC can contribute to that. Well, open science is, as we have said, a transitional process, science in transition, you could say, and the open science paradigm affects the whole of the research cycle, so not only the data and the storage of the data. It implies that the knowledge coming out of research is as early as possible available, that it is as open as possible and as fair as possible. Doesn't mean it can always be open, it means it can always be fair, by the way. So not only within a discipline, but also across the disciplines. So what is the contribution, or what is EOSC? Let's first define EOSC, and then in my next slide I will tell you what EOSC is not. EOSC was described by Ursula von der Leyen about 2 years ago in her Davos lecture as a web of scientific insight. And we tend to call it a web of fair data and related services, at least the European part of that, and I'll show you that in a minute. It's going to be, as Michael said, a federation of relevant existing and future data sources and other systems. A virtual space where science producers and science consumers come together, open-ended with respect to the range of content and with respect to the services, as the World Wide Web itself is, based on the FAIR principles, based on the fact that interoperability should be strived for as much as possible. By the way, data are not fair or unfair, they are fair to a certain percentage. And there are about 23 measures of measuring the fairness of data. They all give different results, so also there we have a lot of work to do. It meets all the data requirements from Europe, if we talk about the EOSC part of it, and it is to be in interaction with the world. There's no use building this for a country or for Europe. It has only value if we build it for the world. 10 things EOSC is not, because there's a lot of misconceptions. EOSC is not a cloud. It's not a cloud infrastructure. Maybe in the name, unfortunately, but it's not a cloud. EOSC is not synonymous to open science. EOSC is a contribution to open science. Open science is wider than EOSC. EOSC is not the EOSC portal, or in other ways of saying it, the EOSC portal is not EOSC. The EOSC portal is a valuable catalog that could offer services that later become part of EOSC. But a lot of people think EOSC portal, because it's the first thing you get with Google if you Google EOSC, is EOSC. EOSC is also not the EOSC-Association. We, the EOSC-Association, of which I may be the president, is trying to establish conditions in order to have EOSC created. We are not EOSC. We are an association of members. EOSC is not owning any data and will not own any data. It will help to provide access to data, but it will not be a big data cloud owning any data or providing any, having any data. It's also not going to be a new data repository or a data management system. It's going to be a federated system of systems, as was explained by Michael just a minute ago. Thus, it's also not going to be an e-infrastructure. It is going to be an infrastructure, yes, but not an e-infrastructure to compute, store, or connect. It's going to be an accessible structure for data and e-infrastructures. And it's not going to be a substitution of any of the existing data or e-infrastructures. It's not, and there's a lot of confusion there, going to directly engage with individual researchers. EOSC is there for research, not for the researchers. So the researchers will benefit if EOSC is there. But we don't do this for any individual 2 million researchers in Europe. We do this for the research process. And finally, it's not in competition with anything or anybody. Maybe with somebody, but not main aim is to have competition. And you could also say EOSC is not there. EOSC is to be. Well, it's a gradual process, so some people say EOSC is evolving and it's almost there, and some people say it still has to come. Depends on how you count and how you look at it. But these misconceptions are important to take away. As I said, it is going to be a web of fair data, and this web will be based on the internet, of course. The internet is based on the connection of computers, networks of computers that jointly over the world forms the internet. And we have built on that internet the World Wide Web of Pages. And with this World Wide Web of Pages, which have built over the 30 last years, you can do a lot of things, hire things, buy things, get courses. There's a lot of possibilities which the web offers. So one of the possibilities is that we put research data that have been made fair on the same web, accessible, findable for other researchers initially and for the larger public later on. So now, if this is the web of fair data, then what is EOSC? Well, EOSC is simply the European part of that and the European contribution to this web of fair data, offering additional services for the European researchers, creating interoperability for the researchers in Europe on top of what is being created worldwide in connection with the other regions in the world. That is the European Open Science Cloud. You could also see it as a twinning infrastructure with being a sort of sister or brother, if you want to, of the European e-infrastructures. So we have certain European e-infrastructures. These offer store, compute, and connect services, and EOSC is going to use these to offer serviceability on the data and interoperability of the data. So EOSC, together with the e-infrastructures, and at the interface of this, there's a lot of software, forms in a sort of yin-yang system, a combination of the EOSC ecosystem. Yin-yang in the sense that if you have data, but you have no storage capacity or no compute facilities or no connection, you can put them on paper and in your head, but it doesn't bring you very much. If you have storage, computing, and connection facilities, but no data in that, doesn't bring very much either. So these two are intermittently linked. One cannot live without the other. What is the position of EOSC according to the European Commission? This is taken from their slides, and Michael just said so already. It's a cross-cutting data space for research and innovation, linking to the other data spaces that are being created at the moment, of which I think the health data space is the furthest. And so the EOSC is this scientific research and innovation data space within this, let's say, set of data spaces that are being created. And you could also see it as a vertical one, but science is not separate from these areas. All these areas have science, all these areas have innovation, and it is the linkage of those that is important. Well, EOSC vision in a nutshell. So I said it's the European web of fair data and related services, services offered on these data, of data that are as much as possible findable, accessible, as much as possible interoperable, and those that are allowed to reuse it, reusable for them, trusted and sustainable. This is to unlock the full potential of what can be done by research. In my estimation, less than 2% of the research data coming from research nowadays is available on the web and is as fair as possible. So the data, Michael showed that 40% of the researchers now and then use an institutionalized repository. It only means that it's for the data that is there. Then you're not talking about the data that is not there, which is not being available at all. This is to ensure that ultimately open science practice and skills are rewarded and become the new normal, as we have been discussing this morning, to enable the definition of standards and the development of tools and services. That's an important step we have to do with this EOSC development, and to allow researchers to find, access, and reuse these results. And ultimately, to establish a sustainable federated infrastructure. The infrastructure Michael has been talking about, which is now being created by the procurement done, or let's say ordered by the Commission, needs to be a sustainable infrastructure and needs to be operated later on. I'll come back to that in a minute. So this is all described in what we call the SRIA, the Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda for this case, EOSC. You can find it on the website of the EOSC-Association. As Michael said, it's also a policy action, so it's a policy priority of the European Union, driven by DG RTD and DG Connect, and it is recognized by the Council of the Union in one of the 20 actions. Action 1 deals with open science and deals with EOSC, but also the research infrastructures and also the skills actions of ERA are very important for this development, as was also shown by Michael. We is the association, started in June 2021 when the co-program partnership was signed between the European Commission and the EOSC-Association, being the representative of all the stakeholders in Europe. And as Michael said, the Commission offered to put 400 million euro in EOSC-related infrastructure projects, and we committed 500 million euro in kind from our members of the association, which we are monitoring at the moment. So it's a partnership, and the partnership is based on an MOU that is overlooked by the partnership board, was mentioned by Michael as well. So on the one side, there's the association, on the other side, there's the European Union, and signed by the European Commission, in this case by Anna Panagopoulou. And then the countries, the member states, form an expert group with in the Commission, and they are per definition invited in the partnership board meeting. And so the steering board is in this way involved in the partnership of the EOSC. It's all based on what we call the SCRIA and the MAR, the Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda, and the multi-annual roadmap that is being developed every period of the Horizon Europe program. These were the three, let's say, main objectives which I presented a slide earlier. And what we do is, in a multi-annual roadmap, describe what is going to be the next, let's say, phases for this. And we is not us as an association, we is the Commission in this case. They write the programs, but they, according to the MOU, have asked the association to give input for what is going to be the next phase of the multi-annual roadmap. At the moment, we are developing the multi-annual roadmap input for the Commission for the period 2025-2027, where we want to expand from where we are now, and running at the moment is the 2023-2024 period, which you can find the program on the internet from. What's our work plan as an association for 2023? Well, our main aim is to steer the coordination in this ecosystem. So the strategic approach, especially with respect to communication and engagement. We talk to policymakers, with research funders, we have research performers, service providers, projects, researchers. We have a rather complex network, and the network of nodes you can see on the left side in this. This one EOSC is to create awareness, to help with the policies, to see to it that the data become fair data, to see to it that the infrastructure gets established, to offer ultimately services, and that has to lead to results. That is our work plan for 2023. And we do that, for example, by creating national tripartite events. We did in 2022 for 16 involved countries with 1,293 participants and 177 speakers. We invented the term national tripartite event in the middle of the year, and by the end of the year, this was the result without asking for it. So all the countries were eager to do that. We look at 2023, in March it started again. We already have 5 countries targeted and already quite a number of participants, and these are the upcoming events for the period May to September. So these national tripartite events really help to get the parties in the country, the funders, the researchers, the how do you call them, the ministries, so the government itself, together to talk about what is our contribution to EOSC, and, for example, as Michael showed, can we create a national node. So overall, we have targeted 21 countries, almost 1,700 participants in national and national tripartite events. We use national for Switzerland because there it was not a tripartite event, to be exact. And we have created a lot of, let's say, noise with that in a positive sense, and it has created also a number of, let's say, country pages on our website where you can find who are the representatives, what is done in the on open science in the country, how are the coordinating structures, etc. What do we now concretely aim for with the work we are doing? We aim for, and that is not saying this is already there, we aim for means we are working on this and quite a bit is there, quite a bit still has to be done. Researchers to be publicly, that do publicly funded research to make their results as openly as possible, their relevant results as openly as possible available. We aim for more support by professional data stewards. I mentioned it this morning. In research performing organizations in Europe, the research data management and the open science development can be, let's say, enhanced by having data stewards helping, like we have analysts helping with the chemistry, like we have technicians helping in the engineering research, like we have analysts in the medical sciences. So we should have data stewards doing the same thing for most of the researchers in all the domains. Data produced by publicly funded research should be as fair as possible by design, if possible. Many machines produce data, and these data can be fair by design to a large extent if you program the machine properly. The EOSC interoperability framework, mentioned by Michael as well, is going to support a wide range of fair digital objects. And I use the word digital objects here because data is usually not understood as data in the traditional sense, plus publications, plus software. But if we talk about digital objects, this is a broader term, including, as I said, software and other research artifacts. The EOSC Federation, and that's the system of systems, which Michael talked about, is to be populated with a valuable corpus of interoperable data. And ultimately, EOSC version X of EOSC, and we start with the minimum viable EOSC. This is called the EOSC node. The European EOSC node is operational and provides a stable infrastructure supporting the research process and addressing the societal challenges. The scope is to widen and serve ultimately the public and the private sectors as well. And in the end, we hope EOSC will be a valuable and valued research to a wide range of users from research, education, public and private sectors. Where do we stand today? Well, we've had an initial period, 2015 to 2020, mainly under Horizon 2020, where there was not much convergence. There was a lot of work being done, a lot of projects being generated, a lot of results also being generated, some of them more valuable than others. And we have to see that we get our aims sufficiently developed in the present period and to get the conversions going in the period 2021-2026. And we have to start thinking about, which we've done, the period after 2027, when Horizon Europe will be followed by the next framework program. And for this, it is essential that we get this minimum viable EOSC, or the EOSC EU node, operational as soon as possible, because then we can start building from that to the network, the system of systems. So as much as possible aligned with the relevant research community, so not overdoing what has been done already, but using the work that has been done at the European, the national, and at the institutional level. We are discussing with the Commission the tasks that need to be done. The operational tasks are the first two. So deploying and operating the EOSC node, that is creating it by the procurement and maintaining and running it after that. So elements that are as close as possible to 24/7 approach for this EOSC EU node. And then build on that the further development of the system to enable ultimately this web of fair data, to develop and prototype new elements for this and support the evolution. And this could be done by an additional new program in the new framework program, and to enable ultimately the open science policies and the uptake of open science practices. And I think this could be the main contribution in the long run of EOSC to the open science development. So getting ahead of the curve and advancing to the next level means taking advantage of the ongoing EU and national policy, taking an understanding the evolvement of the objectives of the funders and the users of those funds. So the objectives of the funders should be to push in this direction. By the way, funders are not only the national funders or the European Commission, funders are also the institutions themselves. They get money from the government very often, and they fund the activities in their own institution. So they have a role to play here as well. Join this powerful movement to make open science the new normal, built on the positive experience of the cluster projects in the different fields of science, and to connect, as I said this morning, the national as well as the domain-specific level at the institutions and at other places. With that, let's co-create EOSC, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Karel. And the next speaker, it is Sofie Björling. She's director for the Department of Research Infrastructure at the Swedish Research Council. And you are also the mandated organization in EOSC-Association for Sweden. So,
thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me. Very interesting to hear everything that's going on. And as you heard, my boss was here earlier and told you that we are a public funder of research and research infrastructures. That means that we support research and research infrastructures in all disciplines. But we also have other tasks when it comes to open access to research data and EOSC. We are commissioned by the government to coordinate and follow up and promote collaboration on the national work on open access to research data. And the national goal in Sweden is that all research data should be fully implemented and open access no later than 2026. It's pretty soon, an ambitious goal, but we're working on it. The National Library also has an equivalent assignment on open access to scientific publication, and universities and larger and higher education institutions have the assignment to develop their own work on open science. We have, as Wilhelm said, been appointed to coordinate and promote the Swedish engagement in EOSC as the Swedish mandated organization. And we also support the governmental representation in the EOSC steering board, which was one of the squares that Karel showed us. So there we do have quite a lot of work and tasks in this area. So why do we think participation in EOSC is important? Well, we think it's important to align the national work on open access to research data with EOSC. It's important that these two tasks do not proceed independent of each other. It's part of the national strategy for participation in Horizon Europe. And we see it as a very good opportunity for the Swedish research community to contribute to the vision of an open science systems. And we hope, of course, that there will be more Swedish EOSC members in the future. Some of our activities when it comes to open access to research data and EOSC, we do recommendations and guidelines, and we make both recommendations to the government, because we are an advisor to the government, and to the research community and our other funders and organizations. We have made surveys that show that researchers, which are really the ones that should do the work, and we've heard before it's going to take a lot of time, but in some areas, research areas and disciplines, it's quite insecure about open access to data and EOSC. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. We take initiatives that contribute to increased knowledge and cultural change. And we, of course, would like to see that there's an assessment of the possibility to make open data openly accessible will become a natural part of the research process. That's something that everybody does at the beginning and continuously during the research project. As open as possible, of course. We take initiatives to promote the long-term usability of research data, including fair data management and data management plans. We support organizations that are engaged in EOSC, and we do some of this work we do by using an appointed external research reference group for open access to research data and EOSC. And that reference group contains other Swedish EOSC members, universities, research funders, research infrastructures. So we try to have a dialogue, a national dialogue on this very important questions. So what do we do in relation to EOSC general objectives? And these are the ones that Karel showed from the SRIA. The fact open science should become the new normal. We do recommendations on open access to research data, and we recommend that research data financed via public funds should be published openly accessible as soon as within a reasonable time after it has been published. And is of course that determining what data can be published should be within applicable legislation, of course. Initiatives for skill development. We have published a handbook on open access to research data. And we discuss incentive and merits for open research access research data. And that's, of course, very important, and we talked about it before. It needs to make it, for the researcher needs to feel that it's worth all the time it takes. And it's, of course, also a little bit like what's in it for me as the researcher to do all this work. When it comes to the second objective, standards, tools, and services, we have requirements for research data management plans. And so everybody that gets finance from us need to have a research management plan. We coordinate the research data management plans. We have criteria and recommendation for fair research data. And we survey processes for open and fair research data in different disciplines. And we see, as I said before, it is quite different in different disciplines. We support research in all areas. And in some areas, this is very developed. It's something that's been going on a long time. But in some areas, they need more knowledge. When it comes to researchers, that's, for example, the research where they do interviews or where they have artistical research. These are questions that are, it's not as easy, and it's a lot of discussion needs to be be had, and also the laws need to be understood a little bit better, I think. There's a lot of insecurity out there. So we try to do our best here to help out. Sustainable and federated infrastructures. We're financing data management and research infrastructures with specific requirements to support open access to data. So all the research infrastructures we finance, we have requirements. And we also fund specific research infrastructures that have as their task to make data available, such as the Swedish National Data Service, and also SUNET does a lot of this work. Because it is this, open access will cost money, and this is important that also the people that give us the money realize as well, because this is going to cost money. So as you see, we do quite a bit, but we need to do much more. And I think it's very important to do it all in collaboration with many organizations, but not the least with the researchers. Those are the ones that's going to do the work. We need to find out what works for them and also what's in it for them. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Sofie. So Sofie talked about the researchers, but we have also the institutions. So the next speaker is Astrid Söderbergh Widding, president of Stockholm University, and Stockholm University is also a member of EOSC-Association. Floor is yours, Astrid.
Thank you. And good afternoon, and thanks for having invited me to this panel on the European Open Science Cloud. I've been given 10 minutes to reflect from a university president's perspective on EOSC. But let me first say that it has been very interesting and rewarding to listen to our two international introductory speakers, Michael Arentoft and Karel Luyben, getting the perspectives both from the Commission and from the EOSC-Association, but also, not least, to Sofie Björling from the mandated organization, the Swedish Research Council, to get an overview of the current status of EOSC and its future. Just a personal background, I've been working actively on the advancement of open science for many decades, already as a researcher in humanities, and during the past 10 years in my role as president of Stockholm University, as well as chair of the BIBSAM consortium for 7 years. So I'm not really a newcomer to the field. Still, I must confess that when I first heard about EOSC, it was a challenge indeed to grasp what it was all about. The overall idea, fine, but how to make it work in practice? And with all due respect to the mandated organization, at this early stage, they did not succeed in really explaining it to us rectors or presidents. So we asked ourselves, why bother at all? Well, I do believe that as president of the university, working for the cultural change needed to make open science becoming the new normal, I have a responsibility to work actively on a policy level and to support common initiatives, not least at the European level. Of course, not uncritically, but still with an open mind. It is definitely better to engage and try to shape and develop policies and instruments together, rather than just standing by. I also believe that dialogue and policy work is much needed at all levels, both locally within the university, nationally and internationally, as well as between the different levels. The challenge with engaging in this way is that you have to do it without knowing the details of the operational work. This always means that you can meet with negative reactions from people knowing better and probably perhaps knowing better. But it is also important to listen to their views because there may be something to it. And in this sense, working with EOSC at a policy level differs very little from leading a university in general. And I'm ensured that EOSC will become an important federated infrastructure, or is already, which will combine the three different levels, local, national, and international, with a means to advancing the shift to open science. Perhaps we haven't reached this goal yet, but we are definitely on our way, and it is necessary to work together. But how then do it in practice? To start at the local level, Stockholm University was among the first adopters in Sweden of an institutional policy for open science. Such a policy must always start at an overarching level with the question of research culture. Without a research culture that supports and promotes open science, the implementation of individual measures will not be successful. The university must also acknowledge and meet the researchers' need for support and key services throughout the entire research process. The university should facilitate and encourage publication of results and data under an open license, and it has the responsibility to secure that these results and data are dealt with according to FAIR principles and in an information-secure manner. And this, too, throughout the whole research process, and even after, I would add. The culture at the university should support and promote active work on open science, nationally and internationally. And then on open science, both as a crucial means to reach the SDGs, as the UNESCO recommendation emphasizes, but also on sustainability as a basic principle for the development of open science in itself. Last but not least, and this has been much discussed today already, a university policy for open science cannot do without mentioning incentive structures in research evaluation. And here, of course, the university cannot act in isolation, since research assessment and peer review in general, to the largest extent, is performed by the international research community. So it's crystal clear that we need to cooperate, not least internationally. At Stockholm University, we are signatories of both DORA and QUARA, which is a way of signaling internally and externally our own views on good practices in research assessment. How then about the national level? The last Swedish research bill, lasting from 2020 to 2024, stated that 100% open access to scholarly publications should have been reached already by 2021, which is unfortunately not the case yet. But also that open science, including access to research data, should be implemented by 2026. And as we heard from Karin this morning, Karin Grönvall, the National Library got a commission from the government to present national guidelines for open science due in January 2024. The Swedish Rectors' Conference had already decided on a roadmap for open science and a guide for its implementation, stating what each institution should do year by year until 2026. And in 2023, all institutions who have not yet done so are encouraged to strategically evaluate to join the EOSC-Association in order to be able to take part in the work at the European level and influence the further developments. The 9 Swedish universities who have joined the EOSC so far have established a common network in order to exchange ideas and experiences and to strengthen the Swedish voice in the EOSC context. And as we heard from Sofie, there is also this broader reference group driven by the Swedish Research Council as mandated organization, which includes higher education institution members such as funders or infrastructures. Finally then, we have the European or even broader international level. And here it is clear that EOSC already fills an important function and will do so even more as it develops. Of course, an important mission is to ensure that open science is both taught and practiced within and beyond the scientific community. Also, EOSC will facilitate fair work at the national and local levels by enabling the definition of standards and the development of tools and services. It will also enable open sharing of results through a sustainable federated infrastructure. But I think, and that Karel mentioned that, it is also important to have the right expectations on EOSC. It will not engage with researchers on an individual level, but only through intermediaries, such as universities or research institutes, research infrastructures or associations, and so on. Finally, let me once again refer to the Lero comments to the Swedish draft council conclusions on high quality, transparent, trustworthy, and equitable scholarly publishing. Here, Lero argues that more has to be done, both by the universities and by EOSC, for the development of interoperable non-profit infrastructures to be connected to the EOSC that are mentioned in the council conclusions. And I quote, "The level of engagement between these partners is currently too low. Lero advocates that the Commission establish funding programs and bidding calls specifically to attract universities into closer EOSC engagement. In this way, the goals of fair and open data can be reached through creating an explicit program of incentives, end of quote. And I would like to end these short remarks with agreeing that, and this is really in line what I tried to say also this morning, that collaboration and engagement is necessary at all levels, as well as to have the right incentives in place. And this is true within universities, across member states, and for the Commission to really enable for EOSC to fulfill its great potential for open science. Thank you.
Now I welcome the last speaker, and it's Jessica Lindvall, and you have really many hats. So you're employed at Stockholm University, and you are at the NIBIS infrastructure, and at SciLifeLab as well. Yes. And you are within a task force in the EOSC-Association, so you have a lot of work to do and to talk about.
Thank you. Yes, I'm a Duracell rabbit, basically. Yes, so thank you so much, both here in the audience present, but also online for listening to this one, and thank you for the invitation for being here. Yes, I have many hats. I'm here today as a representative for research infrastructures. And one of my hats is to be head of training at SciLifeLab. It's a newly established lifelong learning initiative that SciLifeLab have engaged in. SciLifeLab, as I will come to, is a governmental research infrastructure. My other hat is that I'm deputy head of node of NBIS, which is a national bioinformatics infrastructure Sweden. VR-funded, a Swedish Research Council-funded research infrastructure, also distributed across Sweden. It also is the Swedish node of Elixir, which is a pan-European research infrastructure in Europe, where Sweden is one of the members. So, a research infrastructure perspective. Let's see. Yes, so here are the benefits, again, echoing what we have seen. We have seen many benefits. Oh, no, it doesn't work. Let's do it like this. Yes, sorry. I had this, sorry. So what I wanted to say is that we have a lot of benefit, and now I'm echoing what we have said during the whole day. We see an increased impact of accessibility. We will see that during the pandemics, as you see on the right side on these slides, the COVID portal and everything that came out of the pandemics and global emergencies, we can see equal opportunity to accessing open knowledge, and also increase collaborative effects with open science. So it's clearly a benefit thing, and again, echoing also about team science, because all of these examples on this slide are about team science, where multiple roles has come together to do this. This slide I wanted to represent, and this slide is by no means a full picture of what is ongoing. What I want to have with this slide is that there are many, many initiatives in Europe, both from a top perspective, but also from a bottom-down perspective. There are so many grassroots initiatives that is happening in Europe, in Sweden, and elsewhere. And I wanted to say that we need to meet somewhere. And for this slide, I want to particularly highlight then Elixir and EOSC and Open Air as one of that the Swedish research communities really benefited from, in my experience at least, channeling regarding open science. At the community level with the grassroots initiatives, these are really also communities that have been beneficial, connecting to each other and then channeling up as well, which I think is a really good thing. So, open science in Sweden. So, as I'm now anchoring what the previous speakers also have said back to the national level from a research infrastructure perspective, we all know this. This is why we are here, basically. We heard this also this morning, that we have the Swedish presidency of the EU. We are focusing on several things, and this is really good from a research infrastructure perspective, I think. accelerating the transition to open science, which I think research infrastructure can take a greater part in doing, not only from an institutional level, but also from a distributed national perspective of our research infrastructure. That will allow also increased access to all the research infrastructure and increasing then the strengthening the synergies with the Horizon Europe and other things ongoing in Europe. And of course, this conference is an excellent example of what is happening. Back to Sweden then. What do we have in Sweden in terms of research infrastructure? And this is also by no means a complete list. This is what the Swedish Research Councils are listing on their webpage. And in addition to these, there are of course also governmental research infrastructure and core facilities around the nation. The list that is across in the National Research Council pages are 6 thematic areas, and the numbers then corresponds to the number of research infrastructure funded. The definition of a research infrastructure, if some of you wonders, is now on the screen then. So research infrastructure, according to ESFRI glossary, is that it should enable research and innovation, and it should do so by having then the resources and services to researchers to do good science, right? And traditionally that has been scientific equipment, that has been hard technology things. I really like to add, and I think that is something that we have missed a bit here today, is the people infrastructure part of a research infrastructure or anything. I have a simile that someone told me that a research infrastructure is the car, but the car can't, you need the infrastructure of the car to work. I mean, in the road, you need the roads. The roads can be data management and how you deal with the data that comes out of the car. But who drives the car? Who takes care of the car? The people infrastructure from a car perspective is super important. And I think that is something that we tend to forget when we develop and sustain research infrastructure. That goes to career development or whatever you want to say. And the recognition and incentives, as we have talked about, goes as much to technical and staff scientists in research infrastructure. 2 examples then from from life sciences, where I come from. So SciLifeLab is a governmental nationally distributed research infrastructure. It was founded in 2010 by 4 universities, 3 in Stockholm and 1 and then Uppsala University. Now it's distributed across the whole Sweden with 6 or 7 SciLifeLab sites. The current backbone is as follows. It's the infrastructure. It contains 10 technology and data-driven platforms. It has 40 units and 500 staff scientists. And these staff scientists and technical staff are people with roles that should be also recognized in the incentives and credits thing. Another pillar is the data-centric life science pillar. And then now, soon, it will be the training and lifelong learning as well. And then it is grounded in a research ecosystem, of course, because we are supporting the research. A good research feeds back to the infrastructure, doing good support, then feeding back to the research community. And so it's like a feedback loop. NBIS is the bioinformatics platform at SciLifeLab with around 150 staff scientists currently. We are distributed also across 6 different sites in Sweden. We have our pillars in support to the community. We have 30% of infrastructure, so tools, resources, you name it. And then we do 20% advanced training. This is one of our flagships in NBIS. And then again, we are the Swedish node of LXC, which is one of the ESFRIs in Europe. So what are the examples from open science? What can we contribute with, and what do we contribute with? For SciLifeLab perspective, has been very active in the COVID-19 and portal and the pandemic preparedness portal, and also have that mission from the government to prepare pandemic preparedness. SciLifeLab is very strong in promoting and delivering openly accessible tools and resources, and there are other infrastructure in Sweden very good at that as well, of course. SciLifeLab fosters open science, also now via the DDLS program, which is a huge Knut Alice Wallenberg Foundation project. that SciLifeLab coordinates. And it also have a DEI, so a diversity, equity, inclusive group, which I will come to a point soon why this is important as well in terms of open science. NBIS, on the other hand, as it is a node of Elixir, it really channels a lot of good outputs that comes from Elixir. And Elixir does many good things in terms of open science for life sciences. It has been built by the director, Niklas Blomberg, and his team with the mantra of open, 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 open from the beginning. It's super important. And this is something we all kind of have taken with us into NBIS as well. NBIS has a national research data management support to the research community. Over the last year has built great capacity, supporting the data that comes also out of SciLifeLab and elsewhere. And all the training that we do, the 20% training we do, are openly accessible and could be read as book, annotated, so you can train yourself, even if you are not taking the courses. So we're really trying to verify as much as we do as outputs. And that's the yellow point there. So I think that research infrastructure could, or even should, play a greater role in fostering and also in the transition for the research community, maybe using lifelong learning trajectory in this open science. We have a great deal of expertise within research infrastructure. We can capitalize on that expertise and also recognize that they are a channel to the research community. So by fostering the people infrastructure, we get another channel out to the research community. Even if they are the end stakeholder, we are the internal stakeholder that needs to be taken care of. Okay, my question then to you, is open enough? What else do we need to do? Are the efforts that research infrastructure do enough? They are scattered. Is that enough? Should it be more coordination? So we need to kind of think of this top thing, that what funding and policies, etc., what that plays in combination also with the more community networks, etc. All of these things. What roles does everything play, and how do we coordinate all these things? So this is my kind of last slide, and to show you how we're giving you some answers to this from my perspective, from a research infrastructure perspective, that we together should meet these challenges. So policies, and echo again, these are super important because they remove obstacles and they set the tone. Super, super important, right? Also is that policies can really enable open science to be equal science. So that it's not, we don't talk about open science in 10 years, we should talk about science. And of course, it eliminates disparities and reduces imbalances. Funding, much is about the money. We can't get away from that. It's there, we needed to develop, also echoing for what Sofie was saying, needed to have sustainable and developed infrastructure, but please do not forget the people infrastructure. We always talk just about the hardware here. Focused efforts to fund initiatives directed to the people tier, if you want to call it like that, is really, really needed. Community networks, we know that, all of us, that is a bottom-up approach and drive cultural changes. They are ambassadors for open science. So if we don't have the grassroots level with us, these people, we can't really, someone said eat strategies for lunch, or something like that. It was really nice. We as a research infrastructure, at least I can only talk for myself, I need better ways to connect to them, to benefit and capitalize on their knowledge and skills. We have the capacity building. I'm biased training and lifelong learning, but I think this is key, for sure. It's important that lifelong learning is something that happens across the whole trajectory. So even if you have you have ended your formal education, you still need to be upskilled and reskilled along your whole trajectory. We need to find ways on how to do that, and maybe research infrastructure can play a role here to do training, lifelong learning, that is a complement to the university and institutional training, because that type of training is is something else, and something else might be needed on the longer trajectory. Incentive and metrics, we have talked a lot of that. The only thing I want to lift here is that we need to have other incentives for other types of outputs. Code, data, software, training materials. Why isn't training materials regarded as something good that you share, for instance? And again, last but not least, and that's sadly the lowest point here that no one has touched upon today, is the equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility. And I really think that having diversity in your projects, in your research, is key, and we should not forget that point. So I think that was, yes, thank you. Nick.
Stay on the stage here, and I will invite all the speakers to come up here, and we have a panel discussion about this. Have you learned anything about EOSC? Do you know what it is now? Yes, you learned a lot from these excellent speakers. I think we all have. But I think we have listened a lot now for the whole day. So I will first have a question, and then I will open up for questions from the floor, and if there are any, or we have questions online as well. But I think the theme of the conference today is from policy to practice. And what could we call EOSC today? Is it policy or practice?
It's policy and practice.
How?
Well, without the policies, there is not enough driving power, and the policies also need to be aligned, I think, in the different countries. At the same time, a lot has been done with the many projects, and now especially with the procurement, where we hopefully can bring together the results of many of these projects, the practice is also going to be established. Depending on what you call practice, if you call practice the things being done in institutions, the things being done in the projects, the things being done in the research infrastructures, then there's a lot of practice. But there's a lot of coordination needed, I think, of the practices that are there.
Yeah, I think indeed, I mean, we are not doing only policy, we're also supporting the practice, but the policy is needed because it's all about investments. And when you ask for an investment, you need to show that you have a strategy, well argued. So this is needed, in particular in the beginning, obviously. But gradually, we're moving towards more practical implementation. We see it, you mentioned 2015. This is now 8 years ago. Again, it's a question of accelerating. It's a question of rolling it out. It's a question of demonstrating the added value for the individual researcher. So the user perspective, I think, is important to always keep in mind and to now show in practice what it can deliver.
Sofie.
I just think the COVID-19 portal that Jessica was talking about, I think, is an excellent example of practice. And I think that's the thing. To start with, we don't have to have it all done and then we start, right? We start with little things, and I think that's what you're saying, and at least that's what I'm thinking. This is federating different initiatives, and this was something that the pandemic, the horrible thing, but it still actually did do a lot to show how it can be done, and I think that was very impressive.
Yeah, I think that Jessica illustrated it beautifully while talking about the very many grassroots initiatives and the EU-funded initiatives, and you said that they have to meet somewhere. So I think it's really both the policy and practice, and both are equally necessary. But I think also the many examples that we got during these presentations really shows that there is a lot of practice out there, more perhaps than people know about, than I knew about before today.
No, nothing really to add. I think as a research infrastructure, it's a bit challenged to navigate in the EOSC landscape. Are you there as the entity of the institution university you are a member from? As I'm employed at Stockholm University, at NBIS is Uppsala University. So which entity, which hat do I have in the EOSC landscape? I know Elixir has a specific Elixir EOSC strategy, which I think is really good. I was part drafting it, so maybe I should not say that. But I think that is an excellent example where they want to kind of position themselves in the EOSC. Is this something we research infrastructure should do, all of us, to have kind of in our work plan or our strategy, point out certain things? Not we don't need the full strategy, but should we have that as a research? Because we are not a legal entity, but I would like a research infrastructure to go in to be fair. We should go in as a research infrastructure and not as the host university, because we are a distributor and that should be mirrored. So I don't know what your thoughts are about those things. So a question back, sorry.
Yes, I think it's a very good idea. And from a research infrastructure point of view, you see also the challenges you're tackling. I mean, if you mentioned Elixir, you have more and more crossovers. For instance, it's not only life science or health issues, but very often, increasingly, it's attached to environmental problems, climate problems. So you do have an interest not only to set up your own virtual research environments, but also to look at how you can discover services in other research communities that could be combined with your own workflows and which allows you to collaborate. And it ties in well also with the fact that research infrastructures are being more and more digitized in terms of instrumentation, in terms of access, in terms of the research outputs, and of course, in particular, research data as outputs. And we see research infrastructures in many cases being in the lead, also practicing open science. So there's a responsibility also to lead the way. And as you emphasized in your talk, also in terms of training and education, I think there's a role there as well.
Thank you. So now we know what EOSC is not, Karel told us, and we have heard about EOSC is both policies and practice, and it's a huge thing to make it going. But do we have anything from the audience, you that are sitting in the room? Any questions? Yes? And we have microphones here. And present yourself first.
Okay, Miriam Mauri, I'm from KI. I was very curious, I became a bit curious about you mentioning, Karel, the procurement process. Can you expand a little bit about that? Are you procuring a minimal viable product, or what is it that you are procuring?
Yes, we are, but we put it in more understandable terms than a minimal viable EOSC. We put it in terms of we are procuring managed services. So the idea is exactly from the start of the procurement, when it'll be up and running, gradually you will build a set of services that can already be used by the researchers. So it is building the core, the EU node, if you like, in terms of these additional services that ranges all the way from an harmonized access policy, rules of participation for the service providers, authentication and authorization in terms of access, so also to harmonize that, a PID framework, security coordination, all these things that you need to have a federation operating. So this is the procurement that has been launched, hopefully by the end of this year. We will start, so these managed set of services. And the next step then is to connect to the federation. And that's why also the thematic nodes, like you see in Elixir, the national nodes as well, are very important because they must be part of the federation. So the procurement is about the EU node in the first instance, but later on, of course, the connections to the federations are important. And so you need this core set of functionalities to enable the federation further down the line.
Yeah, maybe good to mention that the term minimum viable EOSC was invented some time ago in analogy with minimum viable product. So this EU node should contain all the essential elements that are needed in order to grow later into a larger structure.
So when we have built that, we can say that we have a start of EOSC?
Yeah, I'm sure. As soon as EOSC node is operating, then I will say there is EOSC.
That's good. We have questions from the online visitors, so please.
All right, so I'm forwarding some questions from the online participants. So here's one. How do you, as a public funding agency, adjust your research assessment to contribute to the cultural shift towards open science, e.g., changing incentives to by changing view on metrics? Did you get that?
It's for you,
Yes,
Sofie.
I understand.
I think so,
Yes,
yeah.
well, we have just joined the Quora, so we are exactly discussing this. And as our Director General said this morning, we are using metrics very carefully. We are now discussing the possibility of using narrative CVs, but we are, this is a process, and we are very happy to be part of the Quora and the discussion. And as I think Astrid said, this cannot be done by one single organization or funder or whatever. We need to do it together, and I think we have started off very well. So it's a work in progress, let's put it that way.
And we can take another one from the online participants.
Sure. So here's another one. Who should pay for the e-infrastructure services, i.e. infrastructure for storage and computing for open data? Pay for it.
Astrid, can you start? What do you think from a university perspective?
Well, in my experience, universities always end up paying these.
That's what they're for.
But I think that this has also to be a shared responsibility, and together with, for example, the funders, funding agencies.
No,
Also yeah, sorry. No, go ahead.
No, I agree, and actually we do in our report that we are sending to the government, which we do now yearly on this, we say that this is going to cost money. Money is needed. It's going to cost a lot of money. Well, you know, in Sweden, it hopefully comes from the above, the public funding, but it has to be shared, and I agree.
So
and I think it's very important that to make it clear that it will cost a lot.
Yeah.
So we will get money within the next research bill then from the government, but they have left. So
Let's hope for that. Let's hope for that. Yes.
Karel, did you want to say something?
Well, I was going to say it depends on, let's say, the size and level you're talking about. Of course, there is always infrastructure at the university. There are computing facilities, not necessarily a high-performance computing, but for our parallel computers. Everybody has a laptop on his desk. So there are facilities at different levels for, let's say, the e-infrastructures. But I think countries would be smart if they try to share as much as possible their e-infrastructures in a particular country at least, and preferably wider than that. And if we're talking about e-infrastructures that are very costly, even the European level should be addressed. Yes, in the end, the science that is being financed is paying for these things, but it's now also paying for these things. So there is a shift. If the computer doesn't exist, you don't buy a computer and you don't spend money on a computer. Now we buy all of us computers and we spend money on computers. We do the research differently than we did before. So there is a certain amount of money for research, and we're shifting towards a system where more of that money, a larger percentage, is spent on properly generating data, maintaining data, and working with data. And that's the only thing that happens. On the other hand, there's other things we don't spend as much money on anymore. So yeah, it is a redistribution, and therefore I think the extra money that is needed in order to make this transition faster, that is useful. I always say that the money, the government in the Netherlands, 184 million euros for open science is transition money to go there faster, not to pay for it, because in the end open science doesn't cost any more than science. It's just science in itself.
Michael.
No, it's indeed a shared responsibility. I mean, we see it already through GEON, for instance, where there's money put in the European level, but you have the national research and education networks, of course, where you have important national investments and institutional investments as well. You see it for EuroHPC as well, where there's another model, but still a lot of co-investment happening there.
So we need to have increased funding in science in whole of Europe to make this, or when we are decreasing, what will happen?
No, I think we should, let's say, redistribute the money over the activities that are needed for science. And also we should, I think, more carefully evaluate what infrastructures do we really need in the long run. What are the ones that are need to be sustainable, because too many of them are now paid by projects. Look at Elixir as an example. It's mainly paid by projects, and that is not a sustainable way. So I think the funders, countries, European funding, and the funding organizations should be carefully looking at what is a infrastructure we want to have in the long run. I cannot imagine that we stop storing data. I cannot imagine that we stop computing with data. So this is a long-term thing, and it will never stop. So don't think of financing this in project way. That is not good.
No, and there has to be sharp assessments of what is, for example, really a national infrastructure necessary.
Exactly.
So I think that's extremely important.
Yeah.
But is it hard also today to know what is sustainable tomorrow? I mean, so what we keep today in 5 years, is that really accessible by then? And the other thing I think is that certain infrastructure like NBIS, we have recognized that we needed to build within the infrastructure, we needed to have a data management team that supported the research infrastructure. The researchers with certain things. That's a people infrastructure, but still, it's like maybe the research infrastructures and other things also need to look upon themselves. What in the strategy, what should we do in order to meet these? It doesn't need to be only hardware, but other things that many things can be for the transition to science.
If I may,
Yes.
it's not an easy task, but when I was part of the rector conference in the Netherlands as one of the rectors of the university, I saw that these rectors were not talking together with the funders about the research structures. And it's not difficult if you have 14 universities to have twice a year a meeting about the research infrastructures that are there and the funders that are supplying that. But the funders also too often start a new project as a new minister or a new whatever, and then a new project needs to start without thinking about what is there and what is there to be sustained, rather than having a systematic way of approaching it. It has improved, but I think it can improve even further.
In Sweden, I think that we have a good system with the research infrastructure. What is it called?
Urfi, the reference group.
Yeah, but
Yes.
the reference, your reference group,
Yep.
and also there is another reference group from the university, so
Exactly.
they meet regularly,
Right.
and I think that's at least a nice way to start such a dialogue.
Yes.
Very good.
Do we have any questions from the audience in this room then? More questions? Oh. No, you will get a microphone. Otherwise, those outside of this room wouldn't hear.
The online participants.
I was just curious, how recently there's been increased focus and attention on security, and I was just wondering how that has affected policy and practice at EOSC.
Well, we have had a number of policy discussions on that. One is around the sovereignty of fair data. And indeed, it's an issue you have to be careful at several levels. So at the data level, you have to be careful on, of course, how you give access to the data. You have to be careful about who should own the data sets and who can reuse it as well. At the technological level as well, there are considerations given the wish for a certain degree of strategic autonomy of Europe, of European infrastructures. In terms of who delivers the different components, you have to make sure that you are still in control of the technologies so that you are not blocked in your wishes for giving open access, for establishing the federation, for sharing data, and so on. So yes, it has given some, let's say, increased thought, not that they were not there before, but there's been increasing attention to maintaining the sovereignty of the data sets and maintaining the independence of the underlying technological components, which should still allow you to reach the objectives of EOSC. And of course, collaborating internationally, there is the issue of mutual benefits, mutual interest, and reciprocity as well. But that then takes it also to the, let's say, science diplomatic level and broader political considerations for international collaboration.
Do we have a discussion on not being an open anymore within the with the threats of security, or haven't we reached that discussion?
Well, in some cases we have. Let me give you an example. In the CESAR network, the network of 60 engineering universities in Europe, we had a task force on open science, and we deliberately made this a new task force on openness of science and technology, including science security, research security in that as a discussion point, because it's influencing us heavily nowadays, whether we like it or not. And there is a relationship with open science. So the questions come from the government whether open science is contrary to science security and to sovereignty. Yeah.
I think the balance is shifting between the as open as possible, as closed as necessary, towards the as closed as necessary component in, I'm afraid.
But maybe, Astrid, you can tell us what happened with the university boards in Sweden now.
Yes, according to our minister, they just we had new boards appointed I think on the 27th of April or so, and they should have been appointed for 3 years, and then 2 days before this should be announced, the minister told that it would only be for 17 months and not for 3 years, and this because of security policy, that they needed to take measures to ensure that security policies were followed at the universities. So, well, some of us had difficulties to see the immediate connection, but anyway. So it's really very much on our agenda as universities, that's for sure.
Yes. More questions from the audience? Yes.
It's not a very EOSC-specific question, but since this morning we've been hearing several times that open science will cost money, and it will cost a lot of money, and it will cost loads of money. I mean, it starts to show, but I've been around for a while, and I can remember that on initial arguments around open science and openness of publication was to save money. Because we spend so much money in public funding of research that goes into private hard disks or whatever. Has anything changed in this calculation that we don't hear what is going to be saved on money?
Well, we don't look at the savings, but I'm sure there's a lot of savings. And then there's an interesting report by PricewaterhouseCoopers from a couple of years ago that showed, whether it's accurate enough is another question, but that showed that if you don't make your data fair in the research domain in Europe, this will cost an extra 10 billion euro per year. So what we are saving is 10 billion euro per year of extra costs if we make the data really fair. So we don't look at the saving side. We don't look at the fact that COVID has been, let's say, treated much faster and much accurate with this approach. And I'm sure that in the domain of climate, in the domain of energy, a lot of improvement can be reached and a lot of things can go much faster. However, we don't calculate this. The costs are here, the benefits are there. This is life. It's always with science.
Sofie.
And I think the point is that the costs in the beginning there will be costs. Most costs will be in the beginning, and then the savings will come later. So we can.
Yeah. It's an investment. To make it go faster, you invest more. Yeah.
Yes, I was going to mention the 10 billion per year study as well, which was our study. Now I'll take your 10 million per year, 20 million per year in terms of transition from the Netherlands.
Yeah.
So it's exactly a program of transitioning. So yes, as you said, there will be costs in the beginning, but further down the line, hopefully they will be saved. If you take reproducibility, there are studies around somewhere, okay, it's not so precise, but somewhere around 30%, which is already significant, up to 80% that cannot be reproduced. So you question yourself, how much waste is going on there, not only in terms of the duplications, but also in terms of building on top of the work of others, which could turn out to be a false foundation. And so lots of efforts will be wasted like this. So it's both a saving of costs, but it's also lost opportunities.
Let me give you another example. It's now clearly proven that open access publications are more read by professionals than the closed access publications or the ones behind firewalls. So doctors, legal advisors, professionals in schools, etc., consume, between parentheses, these publications much more than they were before. So there's a clear signal that with open access we reach a larger public.
Have someone measured that in the sense of, like, when you say carbon footprint, open science footprint? Have we calculated on that? What is the open science footprint? That would be super interesting, because I think that we can do quite a lot, all of us. Just thinking about this audience, and you invite people to talk on your whatever conferences, whatever. Why do, I mean, what if you choose between people, why not choose one that actually are more in the open science practices? Even that if it's not the top, but it kind of shows that the research can be really good following certain principles. There are so many things we can do. That would be interesting. Can't you build that in, like open science footprint thing? That would be nice.
Interesting, Jessica. But I think what you are aiming at, it's the constant conclusions as well, because you, in the beginning, we talked about open access to articles, and it was a demand from that the increase of the costs of scholarly publishing. So I suppose that the constant conclusions, they want it to lead to it will be competition within the market, and that we don't need to pay as much as we do today. So maybe we do savings on the publication.
Yes.
Hopefully. Don't know. We had the question up here. Lena.
Well, open science is extremely important for Europe, but perhaps even more important for other parts of the world. So my question to Michael, perhaps, is the European Commission. How do you discuss support for other countries, Asia, Africa, etc., so that researchers in those parts of the world could get access to publications, etc., and data?
Right, yes, this is indeed a concern for us as well, and increasingly so. And I think the attention increased also with the UNESCO recommendation on open science, which has really an emphasis on equity. It's not only about building capacities there. In some regions of the world, they are ahead of us. So with Latin America, for instance, we have a study that we are going to discuss at a workshop in June around open access models. So we know that for institutional open access models, this is historically the way they have done it. And it also will give us some ideas in Europe for equity, because also within Europe there are differences in capacities available, the investments that are needed in different parts to have an equal access. We are also discussing, of course, in international fora like the RDA, issues around how we can involve international partners. The G7 science communique came out a couple of days ago, and you will see there also a reference to how we collaborate on research infrastructures. We collaborate on EOSC-like on infrastructures, on incentives and research assessment, and we collaborate also on what Nicola mentioned, research on research, so the evidence base for the different scientific methods. We, of course, know that it's very important because science is global. The European researchers cooperate globally, and it's important for us not to project our values, but to discuss these common values, which is part of what we call also our global approach for general international cooperation, where we have had a number of workshops with our international partners on different values that we see. And the latest one was exactly on open science 2 weeks ago. So this is how we do it, both in the general international cooperation context and specifically within open science. We use fora like the RDA, G7, and the Global Research Council as well, that has a working group on research assessment, responsible research assessment.
Give a very practical example, yes, we are talking to the rest of the world also with respect to the development of EOS, but a very simple and practical example, go to the website of GoFair, Global Open Fair, an organization based originally in France, Germany, and the Netherlands, and they have set up in implementation notes, and one of the implementation notes is called VODAN, so VODAN. And it implements virus outbreak deterrent systems, and it has been implementing many of them in Africa. So there are FAIR data points implemented in Africa with the help of people from GoFair, and they form an international network. It's a good example if you want to have a very, let's say, clear, real example of how this is being done. So the people in Africa, in poor countries, I'm not talking about South Africa only, they can implement FAIR data points with the help of people here in the West.
We take one more question from online then, and then you can have your question.
Okay, one more question here, perhaps from an anxious philosopher or art scholar. So while the added value of EOSC is obvious for STEM sciences, the question of how certain social sciences, the humanities, and artistic research fits into this is not self-evident. So what about these fields?
Karel?
Well, we don't make any difference between social sciences and other sciences. Unfortunately, in the English language, the word sciences is more limited than outside of England. I try to convince the people in the UK and the United States to start using the word sciences in the broad sense as the rest of the world, but they don't. So in Ireland, they talk about open research rather than open science, which is fine with me, because we don't distinguish between any of the sciences. All of them are welcome. All of them are on board. There is definitely a lot of work going on in the social sciences and humanities as well. Many projects and many involvement.
Now, having said that, the Council conclusions also explicitly refer to science, social sciences and humanities, because they do have the particularities. For instance, the books are much more prominent.
Sure.
Also, if we talk in broader terms of open science, research assessment would very often be different for that discipline compared to the STEM disciplines. And reproducibility, we mentioned that as a key aspect as well. Very difficult to do in many experimentations of social sciences and humanities.
Astrid.
I think it's very misleading to talk about. I know that it's the common practice to talk about social sciences and humanities because that's not one type of science. Yeah. Within social science, we have large variety of different types of science. So from cognitive psychology to what do I know, social anthropology. So they are extremely different in approach and the kind of data they use and produce and so on. So I really prefer talking about science in general, even though sometimes, of course, one must recognize that there are certain, I wouldn't say that books is the common practice within humanities either, myself being a humanities scholar. In some disciplines, yes, but there is a huge variety and diversity.
Yeah,
Yes.
so rather than saying we have to accommodate the social sciences, we have to accommodate books as well. That's another way of saying it.
Yeah.
But we had the example from the infrastructure from the natural sciences, so maybe we should have had one person from the humanities or something for that inclusion. So you have a question there.
From Ellen Kronander from SciLifeLab and BIS. You said that EOSC is not engaging directly with researchers. And
individual researchers.
Yeah, and I'm wondering a little bit who you think should do that job. Because for this cultural change that we have been talking about this entire day, I think it's really important to actually engage with the individual researchers and not only make policies, but teach them how to practically make their data more fair or things like that.
Yeah, by that is meant we cannot, let's say, talk to 2 million researchers and address individual researchers. But research leaders, which have been researchers, or in many cases still researchers, are the ones that are supposed to talk with researchers directly. Research infrastructures, service providers that help the researchers with repositories, with libraries, with other services, have the contact with the researchers. So the work is being done for research, for the activity researchers do, but we cannot and should not directly talk, or talk, yes, but work with the researchers. This should be done by the institutions, by the research leaders, by the service providers, etc. So EOSC is seen as a structure that helps the researchers indirectly.
Should you then, Karel, maybe have training sessions for us so that we can, on EOSC?
Yes, we should train the trainer, we should develop the skills for the data stewards. Yeah, absolutely. That's what we should help each other with in Europe, in the countries, and at many places. Yeah, sure.
I really think that it is our responsibility also as, for example, universities, but also research institutes or whatever, that we should be the intermediaries. We should provide data stewards and create this culture which facilitates for researchers. But I acknowledge that this is not always being done, not yet at least.
Yeah, I mean, we are the ones who should make sure that the individual researchers are not burdened by any fees. We should make sure that there are the framework conditions in terms of data stewards and so on. So acting as intermediaries is, I think, very important, both as an institution and as a funder.
I think that will be the last word. You drove through your breath, but I see Anna is coming up. So a big thank to the panel about these interesting discussions.